Marcus had always been different from other 12-year-old boys in the small mountain village of Pine Ridge. While his friends spent their afternoons playing video games or riding bicycles through the narrow streets, Marcus preferred to sit by the old stone bridge that crossed the rushing river below. He would watch the water crash against the rocks, imagining himself as brave as the heroes in the adventure books his grandmother read to him. His grandmother Elena was the only family Marcus had left. She worked long hours at the local bakery, her weathered hands kneading dough before sunrise each morning. Their small wooden house sat on the edge of town where the forest met civilization. Elena often worried about Marcus spending so much time alone, but she understood that the boy needed space to process the loss of his parents in a car accident 2 years earlier. The village of Pine Ridge was known for its annual summer festival, where people from neighboring towns would come to celebrate with music, food, and traditional games. This year's festival was special because it marked the town's 150th anniversary. Elena had been chosen to bake the ceremonial bread that would be shared among all the visitors. Marcus helped his grandmother prepare for the festival, carrying heavy flour sacks and organizing the kitchen. He noticed how excited she was about the celebration, her eyes sparkling with joy he hadn't seen since before his parents died. The whole town buzzed with anticipation as volunteers decorated the streets with colorful banners and set up wooden booths along the main road. On the morning of the festival, Marcus woke to the sound of his grandmother humming an old folk song. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon pastries. Through the window, he could see families walking toward the town center, children running ahead of their parents with balloons tied to their wrists. "Marcus, would you help me carry these bread baskets to the festival grounds?" Elena asked, wiping flour from her apron. Her voice carried the same excitement that filled the entire village. As they walked through the crowded streets, Marcus felt a strange nervousness in his stomach. He couldn't explain why, but something felt different about this day. The usual morning sounds seemed louder, the colors brighter, and the faces around him more animated than usual. The festival grounds were located in the town square, surrounded by old buildings with red tile roofs. A large stage had been constructed in the center, where local musicians would perform throughout the day. Food vendors lined the perimeter, filling the air with the aroma of grilled meat and sweet treats. Elena set up her booth near the fountain, arranging the ceremonial bread and pastries in wicker baskets. Marcus helped her organize everything while observing the growing crowd. Families spread blankets on the grass, children chased each other between the booths, and teenagers gathered in small groups near the stage. As the morning progressed, Marcus noticed several men in dark uniforms positioned around the festival grounds. They weren't local police officers whom Marcus recognized from seeing them around town. These men looked different, more serious, with equipment Marcus had never seen before. They stood quietly at strategic points, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. When Marcus asked his grandmother about the uniformed men, Elena's cheerful expression faltered for just a moment. She explained that due to the festival's importance and the large number of visitors expected, additional security had been brought in from the city to ensure everyone's safety. Despite his grandmother's reassuring words, Marcus felt a growing uneasiness as the festival officially began. The mayor's opening speech echoed through loudspeakers, welcoming everyone to Pine Ridge's celebration. Music started playing, people began dancing, and the festive atmosphere reached its peak. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything forever. The festival reached its busiest point by midday, with hundreds of visitors filling every corner of the town square. Marcus stayed close to his grandmother's booth, helping serve customers who came to buy her famous bread and pastries. The ceremonial bread would be distributed later in the afternoon during the anniversary ceremony. Among the crowd, Marcus noticed a group of visitors who seemed out of place. Unlike the families and tourists who laughed and enjoyed the festivities, these men moved with purpose through the gathering. They wore casual clothes but maintained serious expressions, occasionally speaking into small devices attached to their shirts. Elena was too busy serving customers to notice Marcus's observations. She smiled warmly at each person who approached her booth, sharing stories about the traditional recipes she used and the history behind the ceremonial bread. Her joy was infectious, and soon a small crowd gathered around her booth, not just to buy food but to listen to her tales about Pine Ridge's past. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Marcus decided to explore the festival grounds. He wandered between the booths watching puppet shows that entertained younger children and admiring the handmade crafts displayed by local artisans. The music from the stage created a cheerful background that masked any sounds that might have seemed unusual. Near the old church at the edge of the square, Marcus encountered one of the uniformed security guards his grandmother had mentioned earlier. The man stood partially hidden behind a large oak tree, speaking rapidly into a radio device. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the guard's tone suggested urgency. Curiosity overtook caution as Marcus moved closer, pretending to examine the historical plaques mounted on the church wall. The guard's conversation became clearer, and Marcus caught fragments of words that made his heart race. Potential threat, suspicious activity, and evacuation protocol. Before Marcus could process what he had overheard, the guard noticed him and quickly ended his radio conversation. The man approached with a forced smile, asking if Marcus was enjoying the festival. When Marcus nodded and tried to ask about the security preparations, the guard deflected his questions and suggested he return to his family. Walking back toward his grandmother's booth, Marcus felt the weight of what he had discovered. The additional security wasn't just a precaution for a large celebration. Something specific was happening, something the adults didn't want children to know about. His worry intensified when he noticed how the security guards had repositioned themselves around the square. They were no longer spread evenly throughout the festival grounds, but had formed a subtle perimeter around the central area where most people had gathered. Elena was packing away the empty baskets when Marcus returned. She looked tired but satisfied with the day's sales. Only the ceremonial bread remained, covered with a special cloth and waiting for the anniversary ceremony scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. "You look worried." "My dear," Elena said, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Are you feeling well?" Marcus wanted to share his concerns about the security situation, but he didn't want to frighten his grandmother or ruin her special day. Instead, he assured her he was fine and offered to help prepare for the ceremony. As they arranged the ceremonial bread on a decorated table near the stage, Marcus continued observing the crowd and the security guards. The festive atmosphere remained unchanged for most people, but those who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs of increased tension. The mayor appeared on stage to announce the beginning of the anniversary ceremony. As the crowd gathered closer to hear his speech, Marcus noticed something that made his blood turn cold. The casual visitors he had observed earlier were no longer wandering aimlessly through the festival. They had positioned themselves at key exit points around the square, effectively controlling who could leave the celebration. Whatever was about to happen, Marcus realized the people of Pine Ridge were about to find themselves trapped in their own festival. The mayor's voice boomed through the loudspeakers as he began the anniversary ceremony, praising Pine Ridge's rich history and the strength of its community. The crowd pressed closer to the stage, families holding children on their shoulders to get better views of the celebration. Marcus stayed near the ceremonial bread table, his eyes darting between the stage and the suspicious men positioned around the square's exits. His grandmother stood proudly beside him, waiting for her moment to present the traditional bread that would be shared among all the festival attendees. Everything changed in an instant. The cheerful music stopped abruptly, replaced by the harsh sound of feedback through the speakers. Several of the casual visitors Marcus had been watching suddenly revealed weapons, shouting commands for everyone to remain calm and stay where they were. Panic erupted throughout the crowd. Families grabbed their children and tried to run toward the exits, only to discover that the escape routes were blocked by armed men. Screams filled the air as people realized they were trapped in the town square with no way out. Elena grabbed Marcus's hand tightly, her face pale with terror. Around them, festival booths were overturned as people desperately searched for hiding places. The security guards Marcus had observed earlier drew their own weapons, but they were clearly outnumbered and unprepared for this coordinated attack. One of the armed men climbed onto the stage, his voice carrying over the chaos through the microphone system. He announced that the festival attendees were now hostages in what he called a political demonstration. He demanded that government officials meet specific demands within 6 hours, or there would be serious consequences for everyone trapped in the square. Marcus felt his grandmother trembling beside him as they crouched behind the overturned bread table. The ceremonial bread lay scattered on the ground, trampled by people running for safety that didn't exist. Elena whispered prayers under her breath, her eyes closed tightly as she tried to block out the frightening reality surrounding them. The hostage-takers moved systematically through the crowd, separating families and organizing people into smaller groups that would be easier to control. They seemed to know exactly what they were doing, suggesting this wasn't a spontaneous act but a carefully planned operation. From their hiding spot, Marcus could see several of the original security guards lying motionless on the ground. The few who remained conscious had been disarmed and forced to sit with the other hostages. The local police station was too far away to respond quickly, and the hostage-takers had clearly chosen the festival timing to maximize their advantage. As hours passed, the situation grew more desperate. The armed men became increasingly agitated as their demands weren't met. They paced around the square, shouting at their prisoners and threatening violence if anyone tried to escape or resist. Marcus noticed that one guard, younger than the others, had managed to avoid capture by hiding behind the old fountain near the church. The man appeared to be injured, holding his arm close to his body, but he was still conscious and observing the situation. When Marcus pointed out the hidden guard to his grandmother, Elena's expression showed both hope and fear. If the guard could somehow get word to authorities outside the festival grounds, there might be a chance for rescue. But if the hostage-takers discovered him, the consequences could be deadly for everyone. As evening approached, the hostage-takers announced that their patience was running out. They selected several hostages, including the mayor and other community leaders, threatening to execute them publicly if their demands weren't met within the next hour. The festival, that had begun with such joy and celebration, had become a nightmare that threatened to destroy the entire community. Marcus watched the armed men preparing for what appeared to be their final ultimatum, knowing that time was running out for everyone trapped in the town square. In that moment of deepest despair, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't remain hidden while innocent people faced execution. Despite his fear and his grandmother's desperate attempts to hold him back, Marcus knew he had to act. Marcus whispered his plan to Elena, whose eyes filled with tears as she realized what her grandson intended to do. The hidden security guard was positioned near the church, approximately 50 yards from their hiding place behind the overturned bread table. Between them lay open ground that would expose Marcus to the hostage-taker's view. Elena gripped Marcus's hand so tightly it hurt, begging him not to risk his life. But Marcus had inherited his grandmother's stubborn determination, and he could see no other option. The selected hostages, including the mayor and several family friends, knelt on the stage with weapons pointed at their heads. The deadline was approaching rapidly. The hostage-taker's leader stood at the microphone, his voice growing more aggressive as he repeated his demands. Government negotiators could be heard through radio communications, but their responses weren't satisfying the armed men's requirements. The situation was deteriorating by the minute. Marcus studied the layout of the square, identifying the safest route to reach the hidden guard. He would need to move during the next distraction, when the hostage-taker's attention was focused elsewhere. His heart pounded as he prepared himself for what might be the most dangerous moment of his young life. The opportunity came when one of the hostage-takers noticed a family trying to comfort their crying baby. The man stormed across the square to confront them, shouting angrily and drawing the attention of his companions. In that crucial moment, Marcus broke free from his grandmother's grasp and sprinted toward the church. Every step felt like an eternity as Marcus ran across the open ground. His legs moved faster than they ever had before, driven by adrenaline and desperation. Behind him, he could hear Elena's muffled cry of anguish as she watched her grandson risk everything for the chance to save their community. The distance to the fountain seemed endless, but Marcus forced himself to keep running. He could hear shouts behind him as some of the hostage-takers noticed his movement, but he didn't dare look back. The hidden guard's position grew closer with each desperate stride. When Marcus reached the fountain, he dove behind the stone structure just as gunshots rang out across the square. The bullet struck the ground where he had been running moments earlier, sending chips of stone flying through the air. His heart hammered against his ribs as he realized how close he had come to being killed. The injured guard stared at Marcus in amazement, unable to believe that a 12-year-old boy had just risked his life to reach this position. Marcus quickly explained what he had observed about the hostage-takers' positions and their apparent plans for the captured community leaders. Despite his injury, the guard still carried a radio device that could potentially reach authorities outside the festival grounds. He had been afraid to use it earlier, fearing the hostage-takers might hear the transmission, but Marcus's arrival changed the situation completely. Working together, they developed a desperate plan. The guard would attempt to contact rescue forces, while Marcus created a distraction that would draw the hostage-takers' attention away from their radio communications. It was dangerous for both of them, but it represented the only hope for saving the hundreds of innocent people trapped in the square. Marcus looked back toward where his grandmother remained hidden, knowing that she was watching and praying for his safety. The thought of her gave him strength as he prepared for the next phase of their improvised rescue attempt. The guard checked his radio equipment while Marcus studied the hostage-takers' positions. They had approximately 10 minutes before the announced deadline, after which executions would begin. Everything depended on whether their desperate gamble could succeed in time. As Marcus prepared to create the distraction that would either save his community or cost him his life, he thought about his parents and how proud they would be of his courage. He was no longer the quiet boy who sat alone by the bridge watching water flow over rocks. He had become someone willing to risk everything to protect the people he loved. The moment had arrived for Marcus to prove that even a 12-year-old could make a difference when lives were at stake. The injured guard whispered urgent information into his radio, while Marcus prepared for the most dangerous part of their plan. The boy would need to expose himself completely, drawing the hostage-takers away from their positions long enough for the guard to establish contact with rescue forces outside the festival grounds. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the fountain, raising his hands high above his head. His voice cracked with fear and determination as he called out to the armed men, claiming he had important information about hidden security personnel still in the area. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Several hostage-takers turned their weapons toward Marcus, shouting commands for him to approach slowly with his hands visible. The leader on the stage paused his deadline countdown, intrigued by this unexpected development from such a young hostage. As Marcus walked across the square toward the stage, he could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. His grandmother's face was visible among the crowd, tears streaming down her cheeks as she witnessed her grandson's incredible act of bravery. Other families looked on in amazement and terror, unable to believe what they were seeing. Behind the fountain, the guard worked frantically to establish radio contact, while the hostage-taker's attention was focused on Marcus. The boy's distraction was working perfectly, but it placed him in mortal danger as he approached the armed men surrounding the stage. The leader descended from the stage to confront Marcus directly, his weapon pointed at the boy's chest. He demanded to know what information Marcus possessed about additional security forces. Marcus's mind raced as he improvised responses, trying to provide convincing details while buying precious time for the guard's rescue communications. Marcus claimed he had seen other guards hiding throughout the town, providing false locations that would require the hostage-takers to search areas far from the actual rescue attempts. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, the fear transforming into determination to protect his community regardless of personal cost. The hostage-takers fell for Marcus's deception, becoming increasingly concerned about security forces they believed were positioned around the festival grounds. They sent several men to investigate the locations Marcus had described, reducing their control over the trapped crowd. While this dangerous game continued, the injured guard behind the fountain finally established contact with rescue forces. He quickly transmitted crucial information about the hostage-takers' positions, weapons, and apparent plans. Emergency response teams immediately began coordinating a rescue operation. Marcus continued his brave performance, providing increasingly elaborate details about fictitious security positions. The hostage-takers grew more agitated as they realized the complexity of what they believed was a coordinated response to their operation. Their original confidence began to crack under pressure. The deadline passed without executions as the hostage-takers became distracted by their search for hidden security forces. Marcus's desperate gamble was succeeding beyond his wildest hopes, buying time for professional rescuers to organize their response. Suddenly, the sound of helicopters filled the air above Pine Ridge. The hostage-takers realized they had been deceived as genuine rescue forces appeared around the festival grounds. Police officers and emergency responders moved into position, surrounding the square with precision and overwhelming force. The leader grabbed Marcus roughly, using the boy as a human shield while shouting threats and demands through the microphone system. Marcus felt the cold metal of a weapon pressed against his head, but his fear was overshadowed by pride in what he had accomplished. Elena's anguished cries could be heard across the square as she watched her grandson held captive by the desperate hostage taker. The entire community held its breath, knowing that Marcus's courage had brought them to this moment of either salvation or tragedy. The rescue forces called for the hostage takers to surrender, promising safe passage in exchange for releasing all prisoners unharmed. Negotiators worked to de-escalate the situation while positioning teams for a coordinated rescue attempt. In that critical moment, with hundreds of lives hanging in the balance, everything depended on whether Marcus's incredible courage would be rewarded with survival or tragedy. The standoff reached its most dangerous moment as the hostage taker held Marcus against his chest, using the brave boy as protection against the rescue forces surrounding the festival grounds. The weapon pressed against Marcus's temple felt ice cold, but the boy remained surprisingly calm. His mind focused on the hundreds of innocent people whose lives still hung in the balance. Negotiations continued through megaphones as professional hostage rescue specialists attempted to convince the remaining criminals to surrender peacefully. The other hostage takers had been gradually surrounded and disarmed, but their leader maintained his desperate grip on Marcus while backing toward the stage. The injured guard Marcus had risked everything to reach was now being treated by emergency medical personnel behind the fountain. Despite his wounds, the man insisted on staying conscious to witness the resolution of the crisis he and Marcus had worked together to solve. Elena stood among the crowd of rescued hostages, her hands pressed together in prayer as she watched her grandson face the ultimate test of the courage he had displayed throughout this terrifying day. Neighbors and friends surrounded her with supportive embraces, but her eyes never left Marcus's small figure on the stage. The hostage taker's demands grew increasingly irrational as he realized his situation was hopeless. He threatened to harm Marcus unless rescue forces withdrew completely, but professional negotiators continued working to find a peaceful solution. Time seemed frozen as everyone waited for the crisis to reach its conclusion. In that moment of maximum tension, something unexpected happened that would become legendary in Pine Ridge's history. Marcus, despite being held at gunpoint, began speaking quietly to his captor about the festival and the community's celebration of 150 years of peace and cooperation. The boy's calm voice seemed to have an almost magical effect on the desperate man holding him. Marcus talked about his grandmother's ceremonial bread, about the families who had come together to celebrate, and about how violence could never solve the problems that led to this terrible situation. Professional rescue specialists recognized what Marcus was attempting and supported his efforts by reducing their aggressive positioning slightly. The boy was conducting his own negotiation, using empathy and understanding instead of threats or force. As Marcus continued speaking, the weapon against his head gradually lowered. The hostage taker seemed confused and conflicted, as if hearing something in the boy's words that penetrated his anger and desperation. The crowd watched in amazement as a 12-year-old accomplished what trained professionals had struggled to achieve. The breakthrough came when Marcus asked his captor if he had family members who would want him to return home safely. The man's resolve finally cracked completely, and he slowly released his grip on Marcus while lowering his weapon to the ground. The moment the boy was free, he didn't run toward the rescue forces or his grandmother. Instead, Marcus remained on the stage, continuing to speak calmly to the surrendering man until police officers could safely take him into custody. Even in his moment of victory, Marcus showed compassion for someone who had threatened his life. The rescue was complete within minutes as the remaining hostage takers surrendered without further resistance. Emergency medical teams immediately treated the injured while counselors began helping traumatized families process their experience. The festival grounds, which had become a scene of terror, were finally safe again. Elena rushed to embrace her grandson, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. The community surrounded them both, offering gratitude and amazement at Marcus's incredible display of courage throughout the crisis. Local news crews arrived to document the story of the boy who had saved an entire town. In the weeks that followed, Marcus received recognition from government officials and became a symbol of youthful courage throughout the region. But the greatest reward came from seeing his community return to normal life, with families reunited and the annual festival tradition preserved for future generations. The injured guard, Marcus had risked his life to reach, made a complete recovery and remained in contact with the boy who had become his partner in one of the most successful rescue operations in local history. Their unlikely friendship became another chapter in Pine Ridge's remarkable story. Marcus returned to his quiet life by the stone bridge, but he was no longer the same lonely boy who had lost his parents. He had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite being afraid. His grandmother Elena continued baking bread for the community, but now everyone who tasted it was reminded of the day her grandson's bravery saved them all.